When I started looking at all of the 88 books I read in 2025 to try and identify the best books I read this year, I realized that classics felt like they were in the league of their own. So this video is just about classics, and then the next video will be about my favorite contemporary books I read in 2025. Let me share with you top 6 classics I have read in 2025 in no particular order. They are all amazing in their own way. And first one up is Jane by Charlotte Brontë, which I finished literally yesterday, the last day of December. I was completely unprepared for how powerful this novel would be. Jane Eyre is by far the most compelling, the strongest classic protagonist I have read this year. I don't know how, but somehow I escaped knowing anything about this storyline, and so I went into reading this novel completely blind, which was the best thing I could have ever done. This completely took me by surprise. I didn't expect this novel to be so pacey. I mean, this is a real page turner. There are so many events happening from page to page. Despite it being a chunky read over 500 pages, it didn't feel like a chore at all. I was so rooting for Jane Eyre. I loved her fierceness. I loved her integrity. I loved her defiance. And I think this is such a powerful novel because despite it being written almost 200 years ago, it feels so modern. When you look at the main protagonist's fight for her independence, for her fight to shape her own identity and her own place in the world, this is where the power of this book comes from. It's in the fact that to this day we can relate to the main protagonist so much. No wonder that when this book was published, it was an instant hit and everybody thought that it was written by a man, because there's no way a woman would write such an assertive main character. I will talk more about this book during my December monthly reading wrap-up. Here I want to keep it very brief, but I do just want to mention very quickly that what I was especially reflecting on was Jane Eyre's ability to look inward, inside herself, to look for answers and the right decisions, which, again, this is a very modern novel, because I think today we could learn a lot from this novel in a world where we are bombarded so much with external influences, with people telling us what to do, what to wear, what to say, what to believe in, what to be afraid of. I wonder what the world would look like if all of us looked inside our souls a bit more, in search for that integrity and in search for the goodness that is there. Well, let's hope it's there in all of us. Next, we have The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. No surprise there, if you've been watching this channel, you know how much this book destroyed me emotionally. And to this day, that effect is still there. Steinbeck's writing is absolutely hypnotic. When you read this novel, it's not an experience of reading a book. It's almost like a story pressing on your chest. That is the best way I can explain it. And yes, if you've heard about this book, you know that this is about a displaced family during the Great Depression. They are searching for work, but of course they're searching for so much more than just for work. They're searching for their own dignity, for meaning, for survival. During my month of working in the bookstore just this December, one of the customers whom I was talking to about this book said to me that the reason why he loved this book was because this is a journey focused novel, and this is his favorite type of theme. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when I think about this novel, this is not really about the journey. For me, it's all about the characters and the deeper themes about humanity and what it means to be human. This is a book about poverty and injustice and dignity, and there's quite a lot of rage and grief, but also tenderness and solidarity and resilience. This book demands empathy, and it will change you. It will change the way you look at the world. Next, we have the big saga of the Thornbirds by Colleen McCullough. This is the book that swept me off my feet. It kept me turning the pages very late at night. Again, over 500 pages, but it does not feel like a long read. If anything, you don't want it to end. This is a sweeping family saga set in early 20th century Australia, centered around love, ambition, impossible choices, and also very unique romance, which was very beautifully portrayed. This is the type of book that carries you away into vivid, vast, immersive new world, and I am very grateful to Colleen McCullough for introducing me to that world of early 20th century Australia, of which I actually didn't know much about, and I will go as far as to say I probably had some misconceptions about. And of course, at the center of it, you do have a romance that is flawed and painful and unforgettable. And even if you've watched the famous miniseries based on this book, I would really urge you to read the book, because it's still so much better than the already very good book adaptation, due to this book's consuming and unapologetic type of writing. And of course, I had to have on this list A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I read this book quite recently, but I knew as soon as I finished it, this would be one of the top classics I've read this year. This is probably something a little bit different than the first three books that I've mentioned, because it's a little bit lighter in the way the story is told, but don't let it fool you. It is still very poignant and deep and profound storytelling. This is supposed to be a semi-autobiographical novel. We follow a young girl growing up in Brooklyn in early 20th century, and she has a family with a mix of Austrian and Irish heritage. A deeply humane book full of grace and so tender, but without being sentimental. This book is about endurance and resilience and imagination and family bonds, but for me, what really elevated this story even further were the female characters, some of them extremely unique, all of them strong in their own way, deeply flawed, often difficult, but very, very colorful and impossible not to love. The writing here is exquisite. It's slightly restrained, but at the same time deeply observant, which I think really allowed to capture the unique family dynamics and also all these small moments of hope. Just a wonderful, wonderful read, and strangely, despite all the hardships described in this book, very comfort type of storytelling. I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit now, because I have included Josephine Tey on my list with her book titled The Franchise Affair. There is something about Josephine Tey's writing that I find so engaging but also entertaining. So, Josephine Tey was a Scottish writer. She was writing at around roughly the same time as Agatha Christie, and maybe that's one of the reasons why she didn't get enough spotlight that I thought she highly deserves. And she wrote quite a few crime/mystery novels. I am going to read all all of them. I'm savoring them for a time when I will need an entertaining but clever read. In this particular story, we follow a lawyer who becomes involved in a controversial case that involves prejudice. And yes, the crime is the anchor of the story, but the book is not really about the crime. It's more focused on characters and on human psyche. The characters, by the way, all of them are so fantastically written, with loads of humor, with loads of sharp intelligence, and also great social insight. There is a wit in this story, fantastic, incredibly astute observation of human nature, and it just proves that genre fiction, because theoretically this is a mystery novel, can be just as psychologically rich as your maybe more typical literary classics. I really encourage you, if you haven't yet read anything by Josephine, this is a great book to start with. And last but not least, of course, it is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. If you've been watching this channel, this will be no surprise to you that this book is included in my list. I was totally blown away by Daphne du Maurier's writing, by her cleverness, and how she can play with a reader. If you're one of those people that need to know a little bit about the synopsis, we follow a young man who becomes entangled in this mystery surrounding this very enigmatic, beautiful widow. And that's all you need to know. You don't want to know anything else. In this book, there isn't one boring sentence, not one moment where your attention will drift and you'll start thinking about what to have for dinner. I find her writing extremely impeccable, and yes, there are movies based on Daphne du Maurier's books, and I have watched My Cousin Rachel after reading this book. I promise you, they're nowhere near as good as the books. It's not that they are necessarily lacking, but I just don't think that any movie will be able to capture the atmosphere that Daphne du Maurier is able to build for us. How du Maurier managed to give the main protagonist this striking agency while at the same time never allowing the reader to completely trust her or frankly trust the narrator as well. It's just pure skill. This is such an intense but an easy read at the same time because you are under du Maurier's spell. These are my favorite 6 classics, but I do also want to include these 3 honorable mentions. First one is Ghosts by Henrik Ibsen. It is one of 4 or 5 plays I read this year, and this is the one that has stayed with me the most. Ibsen's treatment of human choice, or the illusion of choice, is so good, and it feels brutally honest. There's something very honest about this really massive story that has been compacted into a few pages. There is enormous moral gravity in this very tiny little play. I highly recommend you check it out. I also, of course, have to mention Effi, Briest by Theodor Fontane. I don't think this is a book for everyone, which is why it didn't really find its way into my top classics, but this is the book that has affected me a lot and has stayed with me. Definitely not a page turner, but its hopelessness, which is rooted in these rigid societal conventions, is quietly devastating. And finally, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper, which I have only just discovered this year. Of course, I had to mention this book because, frankly, I am in love with Atticus Finch. Or rather, I'm in love with his integrity, with his moral courage, and with his gentleness. And so I couldn't miss this one out. Now, if you are still with me, here's an interesting fact. Having looked really closely at all of my favorite classics that I have just presented to you, I have realized they have one clear thing in common, and that is that the main theme of all of these books is an outsider. I'm just going to leave you with that thought, partly because I have no idea what to make of it just yet. But at least for now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video, in which I will be telling you all about the best contemporary, mostly fiction, that I have read in 2025. Wishing you a very happy new year, and I'll see you next Friday.